It's impossible to let him go. That's the constant struggle with me. That's the fight that we've got in the business all the time.
Danny Koker built something most men spend their whole lives dreaming about, and he built it with his hands, his instincts, and a trust in people so complete it bordered on dangerous. For 10 seasons, a global audience watched rust dissolve into chrome, watched salvaged junkers get reborn as rolling art, watched a man channel everything restless and creative inside him into machines that made strangers stop on the street and stare. The show was Counting Cars. It aired on the History Channel, and by any honest measurement, it was a genuine television phenomenon that generated the kind of loyal viewership networks spend fortunes trying to manufacture artificially and almost never achieve. Then in 2021, without an announcement, without a finale, without even a brief public statement from the network that had carried it for nearly a decade, it vanished from the schedule entirely, and the History Channel offered nothing but silence. That silence was not a scheduling accident. It was the sound of something breaking, something that had been fracturing from inside for years before any viewer noticed, before any cast member let anything slip in an interview, before the truth surfaced in court filings and legal records that most people never thought to go looking for. The real story behind why Counting Cars went dark is not about falling ratings or creative exhaustion. What actually ended that show was a betrayal engineered with cold precision by someone hired specifically to protect the business he ended up systematically destroying. Danny Koker did not arrive at Cars the way most reality television personalities do, through a camera lens and a network contract. His father worked for the Ford Motor Company, and growing up in that household meant absorbing an understanding of engines, tools, and mechanical possibility that never needed to be formally taught. Cars were the native language of his world, the medium through which he understood beauty and potential. Kustoms, the Las Vegas custom shop he built into a local landmark and eventually a global brand, ran on a philosophy with exactly one word at its center: trust. He called the people around him his family, and that was not a branding decision or a scripted line. He meant it the way men mean things they have never had to question before. Counting Cars launched as the third spin-off of the smash hit Pawn Stars, and what nobody expected was how completely it stepped out of that shadow and became something entirely distinct. It was rawer, louder, and more emotionally exposed than most reality television dared to be, and the custom car culture it documented gave it a visual energy that kept people watching even during the quieter moments between major builds. 10 seasons means millions of people kept actively choosing to come back year after year. And then in 2021, with no explanation offered to any of those people, the choice was made for them without warning and without the decency of a goodbye. No cancellation statement came from the network. No farewell episode was produced. No cast reunion filmed. No press release acknowledged that something real was ending. The schedule went empty where the show used to be, and for fans who had watched every build, every budget argument, every car rolling out of that garage, that silence landed harder than an official cancellation ever would have. When something disappears without explanation, the mind fills the gap, and rumors take the shape of the space available to them. Stories harden into accepted fact with no official version of events to push back against them. The truth eventually emerged through court documents, and it started in 2016, the year Joseph Frontier came into the picture. His role at Kustoms was to manage the shop's financial accounts. Every transaction, every outgoing payment, every dollar moving through the business passed through his hands. Danny needed someone dependable in that position because his own attention was constantly elsewhere, out hunting for cars or in the paint booth working on builds. Frontier stepped into a role built entirely on access and trust, and he used both to begin stealing, not in one dramatic transaction, but slowly and carefully, in amounts designed to remain invisible for as long as the books could be kept from close scrutiny. By the time Danny's team finally tore through the financial records, $75,000 had already disappeared. That money funded a personal life Frontier had not earned. Personal airline tickets appeared on the company account. A down payment on his own private Range Rover came directly out of shop funds. He was spending like someone whose income matched his lifestyle, and the men whose work was actually generating that money had no idea. Running parallel to the theft, he had also deliberately neglected to file the company's taxes on schedule, and that failure brought an $18,000 IRS penalty down on Kustoms, a penalty created entirely by his choices, borne by a business that had done nothing to deserve it. He was pulling money out with one hand and engineering a confrontation with the federal government with the other, and both operations were running simultaneously without detection. But here's the thing, the stolen $75,000 and the tax penalty combined were not even the worst of what the investigation uncovered. Frontier had visited a print shop and ordered signature stamps manufactured, physical stamps carrying the exact signatures of Danny Koker II and his best friend and business partner Kevin Mack, both produced without consent, both obtained in complete secrecy, both kept ready for use on whatever documents Frontier chose to apply them to. Under law, a signature stamp pressed onto a legal document carries the same authority as the person's own hand. That meant Frontier had legally possessed the power to empty every account the company held, sign contracts Danny had never heard of, execute loan documents placing the shop millions of dollars in debt, and authorize the transfer of the very cars that viewers had watched being built over 10 seasons of television. The $75,000 represented what the team caught before they caught him. The stamps represented the power to destroy everything, the shop, the brand, and the personal financial standing of two men who had trusted someone enough to hand him the keys to their entire professional lives. What made the discovery even more unsettling was the realization that he had been sitting on that capability for months without using it to its full potential, which said something specific and chilling about the patience and calculation behind everything he had been doing. Danny moved fast when the stamps were discovered. A lawsuit was filed and every available legal avenue was pursued. Las Vegas Justice Court records confirmed that Frontier faced a felony theft charge in September, and a warrant for his arrest followed. That warrant was never served because Frontier had already relocated to Florida, outside the practical jurisdiction of a Nevada warrant, and his attorney entered a motion to dismiss. Kustoms also directed legal pressure at Randstad, the hiring firm that had placed Frontier in the shop, claiming the company withheld prior history, allegedly including other embezzlement charges at previous employers. That case collapsed too. Frontier reportedly covered the $18,000 IRS penalty he had generated, but the $75,000 and the months of exposure created by those signature stamps went entirely unanswered. The thief walked away without consequence, and the damage he left behind stayed permanently. What Frontier left inside Kustoms was not only a financial deficit. The trust that had held the team together as something more than co-workers came out of that experience altered in ways no legal settlement could repair, and the family the show had been built around was already shifting before any of this became public, for reasons that had nothing to do with the theft. Scott Jones had been gone long before the financial scandal surfaced. Fans who remembered him from the first two seasons knew him as the shop manager who clashed with Danny constantly and visibly overspending. When Scott disappeared from the cast after season 2 with no explanation, the rumor machine started immediately, and when embezzlement news eventually leaked years later, the connection fans drew was the obvious one. Scott handled the money, Scott fought with Danny about it, and then Scott vanished. It had surface plausibility and zero accuracy. Season 3, which aired in 2014, addressed the real reason plainly. Scott and his wife had just had their first child, a son, and his priorities reorganized themselves around that arrival. He moved the family to Tennessee, reportedly built his own shop in Greenville, dropped entirely off social media, and constructed a quieter life at a deliberate distance from the cameras. Rolly Sabo departed next, the Hungarian-born detailer whose thick accent and unpredictable energy had made him one of the most naturally entertaining personalities the show ever found. The actual explanation for his departure was that Rolly had decided to chase something of his own. Rock and Rolly Custom Detailing launched in Las Vegas, and the name recognition from the show gave it genuine early traction. In 2019, he traveled to a training facility in Quebec, Canada to sharpen his craft. And then the pandemic arrived and took a serious cut out of everything he had built. Clients disappeared, financial pressure mounted, and he was left managing the consequences while his former workplace was simultaneously managing its own. Kevin Mack's absence from season 10 landed differently than anything before it, and the audience felt that immediately. Kevin was Danny's right-hand man, a friendship that had existed for over 20 years before any television network was involved, built on shared rides through Las Vegas on custom motorcycles and a genuine loyalty that predated cameras and contracts. On the show, Kevin managed shop operations, kept the budgets from going sideways, and served as the steady counterweight to Danny's creative intensity. When he simply did not appear in the new season, fans who remembered that Kevin's signature had been on those forged stamps alongside Danny's drew the conclusion that the friendship had finally cracked under the accumulated weight of everything. That conclusion was wrong. Kevin Mack did not leave Danny Koker. He left the cameras, and there is a meaningful difference. After years of having his working life and his budget arguments broadcast to an international audience, and after everything the Frontier situation had exposed, Kevin made a deliberate choice. He stepped back from the television component and focused on protecting the actual business. He is still at Kustoms. He still manages daily operations. The friendship that existed before the show still stands. Kevin simply decided the cameras were no longer part of what he wanted, and the work he did for the shop did not require them. What finished the relationship between Danny and the History Channel was a scam that used his face as its primary instrument. Fraudulent advertisements began circulating online, claiming Danny was walking away from counting cars to sell his own line of CBD oil. The ads were assembled convincingly, pulling screen grabs from Fox News broadcasts and arranging them to look like legitimate endorsements from the show's star. Real people who trusted Danny spent real money on a product that never arrived, and some of them called him directly afterward. The fury he felt was not simply professional frustration. His name and image were being used to defraud the exact people who had supported him across a decade of television, and he had no part in any of it. Legal representation was retained to fight the false advertising campaign across social media platforms. The network was not comfortable with what was unfolding, and Danny has said directly that he and the network had a falling out over the situation. That falling out was the final weight added to a structure that had already absorbed more than it could hold. The internal betrayal, the IRS confrontation, the failed lawsuits, the cast departures, the scam, and the network conflict, none of those things individually would have necessarily ended a show with the audience loyalty counting cars had built. What ended it was all of them arriving in the same compressed window, hitting the same operation, wearing down the same man. The History Channel issued no statement. The show went dark. Count's vamped bar and grill, the vampire-themed music venue Danny built in Las Vegas, where his band Count 77 performed, is closing permanently, with the final day set for June 29, 2025. The announcement came directly from the official Count's Kustoms website, plainly worded and without ambiguity. The show is gone, and the bar is ending, and taken together, those two facts carry the weight of a chapter genuinely closing, not pausing, not reconsidering, but closing for good. Count's Kustoms itself is still open and still running. Danny Koker still walks through those doors and does the work he has always done. Kevin Mack is still in the office. Ryan Evans is still in the paint booth. Horny Mike is still building the kind of wildly inventive creations that have always defined what that shop stands for. The museum remains open to the public at no charge, and Danny was just confirmed as a featured guest at the 2025 Syracuse Nationals. The Frontier betrayal wounded the business deeply. The network conflict ended the television chapter permanently, but Count's Kustoms is still there, and Danny Koker is still the Count. The show is over. The shop is forever.